All right, so as far as presenters today, I'm Bruce McQuillan. I'm a partner in the Coupa practice here at CrossCountry. I'm joined with Mason. He's my co-presenter, managing director. He's focused on S2P AI innovations, and he's going to be the one doing the bulk of the talking as we go here. And then from a Q&A perspective, Jeff Hammond, Justin Turconi, and Kevin Van Durham, they're going to be commanding the Q&A session chat and answering your questions along the way. Usually we have one person, but we had a lot of people joining this call, so we decided to staff it up with 3 for this one to try and get all your questions answered. So Mason, let's move on. All right, so let's talk about our audience. That we had a lot of people register for this, and we wanted to share some insights into who is attending this meeting, just to show you kind of the interest in this. We had 100, and this is a snapshot in time, just about a week ago. So the registration list has grown since then. But we had 147 companies register. Most of the companies that registered, as you can see, are live on Coupa already. Everybody seems to be pretty new to Navi agents, which is not surprising since they just rolled out earlier this year at Inspire. But interestingly, and not surprisingly, most people just want to understand what Coupa AI can do. And that's really our goal today, is just to give you an overview of what Coupa AI can do, give you some real world examples, and really walk you through what you can do with AI in Coupa. We are going to focus on quite a few different areas as we go through, and Mason's going to do some actual hands-on. So we'll kind of move through here, Mason, and carry on. Yeah, so as far as we are going to try and make it a little interactive via some polls, and that'll come back up in just a minute. But our agenda is cover everything that's been released from a Coupa perspective in the last few months. A lot was released at Inspire. So we want to talk about the latest capabilities that are out there, Agent Studio, the Tonkean orchestration, what's coming in September around some additional connectivities that are going to be out there. So we'll cover all of that. Like I said before, Mason will cover some real use cases. We're actually going to walk through and show you how those work. And then we'll talk about how you get ready and how you prepare a roadmap to implement AI within your Coupa environment. With that, let's move on to our first polling question. We're going to try to make this a little bit interactive as we go through the session. So if you could answer take a look at where is your organization on the AI maturity scale today, and just answer that quickly, and we'll show the results and move on to the rest of the agenda. All right, so most of you are sitting in the manual processes at this point. I see a little bit assisted, a little bit of augmented. One person responded with autonomous, so we definitely like to learn from you at some point if you've got it all figured out. But really no surprises in the results there. Pretty interesting, and I think that's kind of why we saw a lot of interest in this webinar today. So Mason, I'll hand it over to you now to kind of jump into the details.
Yeah, please. The one person or group that responded there achieved autonomous kind of level of maturity. Please send us a note after the session. We'd love to talk. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Let's jump into it, because Bruce said a lot to cover in a tight 45-minute time frame here. So before we jump in, I assume that everyone on the call probably has some level of familiarity with generative or AI. At least you've used Claude or ChatGPT. But let's just talk first about what the anatomy of an agent is, because we're going to talk a lot about agents and how they work in Coupa. So when we say agent, this is what we mean, right? So an agent has a brain, usually a large language model, although it can be a small language model. There's some variability there. That understands a request and provides a response. An agent also, by definition, has a memory, so it can hold context in the moment and over time. And also agents can plan, or at least more advanced versions of agents can plan and break down a goal into ordered steps that it executes, And then it has access to tools. So think of those as data it can access or pull into to reason on and act on, or direct connections with other systems. So the main point is that an agent can, take an action rather than just simply answering a question. The other, on the right side of the screen here, the other idea worth separating and understanding a bit is prompt engineering versus context engineering. So prompt engineering shapes a single response, right? So that's the controls the tone, the structure, and the output, but just for one specific request. So, for example, in a procurement context, prompt would be summarize the contract's commercial terms in no more than 5 bullets, as an example. Context engineering is broader, so it actually governs what the agent knows, how it behaves, and what it's allowed to do across every interaction, every prompt. So in a procurement setting, this is where agent would have access to your approval thresholds, learn what your approval thresholds are, who your preferred suppliers are, and where you might set a rule that, for example, the agent is allowed to draft a requisition, but actually can't submit it for approval. So that's with that kind of broad general definition of an agent in mind. Let's talk a little bit about how the pieces fit together specifically within the Coupa context. So this slide here covers, first of all, you see that Coupa's latest and greatest AI offerings do provide AI use cases that can address the end-to-end source-to-pay process, which you see at the top there. It also note that there's two entry points here, right? So the first is Tonki and intake and orchestration. Some of you may be aware that Coupa just recently acquired Tonki, which has the ability to act as a universal intake and then to orchestrate across agents and across process steps. So ideally, you would just have one, but for today's purposes, let's assume that there are two, and the Coupa UI would continue to act as the second door, where procurement and AP power users typically would work directly. So inside of Coupa, there are two types of agents, right? So you have out-of-the-box Navi agents. So those are, as soon as you turn it on in Coupa, and some of you may have done that already, you'll see those available. But there's also custom agents that you can build in something called Agent Studio. But then also is something that is coming up in the September release that Coupa is going to provide is the ability for Coupa to connect from an AI standpoint to other enterprise systems and a wider corporate AI stack. So this layer ties together. It's that integration layer you see. And really, Coupa has provided that because they recognize that many customers are likely, and probably the majority over time, will want to incorporate Coupa within a larger AI system. So I won't go into the technical details too much, but the one thing probably worth noting, a term that you'll see there that you may have heard, is Model Context Protocol, MCP. That's something newer that Coupa is going to be providing. And that is essentially, think of that as an open standard for connecting AI agents to tools and data that sit outside of Coupa. So think of that as a universal adapter. The last thing, as we think about the broader picture here, I just wanted to note, because it's a question that always comes up, is the question of risk and compliance. We know, as Bruce alluded to, many of you already run Coupa, so you're familiar with the cyber and risk certifications and features in the base platform that has already. But specifically on the AI front, Coupa is governed by an AIM standard, so achieve that certification, which is AI management system that's consistent with ISO 42001. So there is some certification already in place to give you your risk and cyber teams some confidence to move forward. And I'll talk a bit more about guardrails and governance of individual agents as we move forward.
Yeah, Mason, I'm just going to jump into a lot of people may have heard, especially if you were at Inspire, this new term, Coupa Compose. Everything that Mason just walked through from a capabilities perspective is included in this new offering from Coupa called Coupa Compose. So you may have seen some slightly different slides of how Coupa organizes it. This is kind of visually how we've tied into the source to pay process overall. But if you hear Coupa
Yep.
Compose, that's basically what we're talking about on this slide.
Thanks, Bruce. So that's the big picture, high level architecture. If you were to adopt, like Bruce said, all of the Coupa Compose capabilities around AI, that's what it would look like. So let's start going through the different pieces one by one. So the starting point under the most basic set of capabilities, if you will, are those Navi agents. So these come in two forms, right? So there's conversational agents that work like a chat. You can engage that across the whole, regardless of what page you're on in the Coupa interface, you have that available to you. So you can ask questions and it provides data and it provides answers through that Navi window. So these are typically, knowledge-based questions related to process policy or querying data. And you see some examples, right, of actual agents that are available now there on the left side of the page there. Excuse me. Autonomous agents, so those are different. They run in the background, and they're on a prescribed schedule or based on set triggers with no prompting from you as an end user. So again, you'll see some examples there. An agent that builds a payment batch for all approved invoices every Monday or certain day of the week. And there's also autonomous agents that are available now, which I'll show you in a minute. A couple of examples for sourcing expenses, payments, and so on. So the two start there. I'm gonna show you in just a second. So we wanted one on the kind of procurement sourcing front, I'll show you, and then one more directly related to AP, the discount optimizer agent. So just a little bit about what we're going to show you. I'll kind of explain. So the sourcing consolidation agent, this is something literally that I built and tested yesterday. It looks at open requisitions from different requesters, maybe from different locations, but where there's set commonality in terms of the demand window. So there's a need by date within a certain range, and there's similar commodities, and it actually looks at them and applies some logic, and then actually the agent creates a draft sourcing event that the buyer can then take action on. So it drives a lot more efficiency from a buyer standpoint. It helps automate one of the ultimate goals, right, which is to take in similar demands from across the business and consolidate. That's when where possible. The discount optimizer agent that looks at invoices, right, that are in process where there's an available discount, and it applies an actual hurdle rate to make a determination and a recommendation to AP as to whether or not that discount should be realized. Okay, so let me now switch my screen. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see my screen now. So this is, for those of you who aren't familiar, this is the overall Coupa UI. Once you activate Agent Studio, there's a separate tab that appears here. And I mentioned Navi agents before, so if I go to the home screen, if I move across, I'll have access to, I can always open this Navi screen. So this is where I access those conversational agents. You see there's tabs. You can click all of the standard out of the box. Conversational agents are available in the background, and I can just type in what I want with free text. But for our purposes now, I want to focus on showing you those two autonomous agents I just mentioned in Agent Studio. So this is the part where you build your own agents. It is a low-code, no-code really platform. So let me just show you real briefly the steps involved in creating an agent. So you'll see here everything that we've created in this environment, and the status of all the various agents are here as to whether they're draft, inactive, active, including the ones that are out of the box that I mentioned before. So you'll see this one is Coupa created agent. So if you turn this on in your environment, it'll be there ready to go. But if I wanted to create the new agent, so what I would do here is I click create agent. I talked about the two different types. So in this case, we'll create an autonomous one, and And what's great about it is you can just type in, and makes it easy to use, is you can just type in what you want, right? So in free text, a description of what you want it to do, and it will take a first pass, which is typically pretty good at converting that into agent instructions and guardrails. So in this case, let's say your buyer focused on um, on the same item that maybe bought at different prices by looking across POs. So let's see what it, so based on that prompt, so it actually came up with a name, a price optimization analyzer, a description of what it does. It includes expertise. It includes the instruction, so it makes some inferences about based on my description and puts together an initial set of instructions. But it also includes, which is important, the guardrails. So these are the things you want the agent to never do, like you can never update certain fields, for example, if it's an agent in this case related to POs, or what you want it to always do. And of course, you can update these, make changes as needed. But then as I move through, so it made some suggestions. So that gives me the basic outline, if you will, instructions and guardrails for the agent. So here is where you can further enhance the agent. So I mentioned that context engineering piece. So this is where you can actually add knowledge. You'll see I have some policy documents, an actual document on agent monitoring and oversight policy. So you can add these in there to provide further context and anchoring for that agents to refer to. You can also give it tools, right? So I talked about with the anatomy of an agent, this concept of tools. And so there's two kinds in here. There are Coupa actions or Coupa tools. So think of those as kind of the fundamental actions that can be taken in Coupa that the agent can then draw on to execute its prescribed tasks. So like everything from adding a comment, adding items to a cart, creating a payment batch, et cetera. But then there's also the ability to bring in external information. And I'll show you an example of that in a second. So these are APIs that are easily set up. So there are various data sources, commodities data. I've got some, T-bill and treasury related data pulled in here that can be added to my agent. So for our purposes now, I won't add anything. So you'll see there, and that once I've set that up, then it takes me to my last step where I test it. And then once it's tested, I have the option to activate it. So you can see that, especially for simpler agent, they can be built, tested, and deployed relatively easily. You'll also, too, a lot of times the question comes up about the models used in the background. So you'll see here, it's a combination of OpenAI and Anthropic models, although they're moving more towards Anthropic models. So you'll see here, Sonnet, and it varies the model depending upon the complexity of the task. So let me quickly demo for you the two agents I talked about. So that sourcing consolidation agent that I created. Now, essentially just to kind of give you a quick overview of what this does, I started with a draft like I just showed you. This one is a bit more complex in terms of the instructions, but basically what it does is it looks across requisitions that have a need by date within a certain time frame, the same commodity, and then it creates a draft sourcing event. If there are suppliers that are included in those requisitions, it pulls them in. It looks to see if there's preferred suppliers for that commodity that were not included in the requisition. It adds that in as well. So that's basically how it works. You'll see I have various knowledge documents that it references, and these are all of the tools. And I have this one set hourly. You can set the triggers, as I mentioned before. They can be hourly, they can be daily, whatever cadence you want. So what this would look like in practice here is, so let me go, I'm actually going to go to the activity log here. So again, this is also one of the common questions that comes up as well. How does the monitoring, how do you see what happens? It's all captured in this activity log here, where you'll see, let me go find the one I'm looking for. So this is the sourcing consolidation agent. You'll see that it has the trigger, the execution trace. So every single time one of these agents runs, it will give you the trace of all of the tools that were called, the APIs that were called, the actions that were taken, right? So that's what you see here. But it also provides the output. So in this case, it's set up to, it identified these, in this case, it's just 3 requisitions, all for network equipment commodity. It gives me a summary I can set, and it's also set up to be sent to the buyers. Explains what happened. That this can be set up as an email notification to include whatever information or exclude whatever details you want. But you'll see here it created uh, a an RFP, and by the way, I specified a certain RFP template I wanted it to use. So let me just quickly go and just show you that, and then we'll move on to the discount optimizer. So for that particular trace, you see this ran, it created this network equipment consolidation. It actually included the agents, or excuse me, the requisitions that were consolidated. So if I click on that, you can see, I'll just click on just a few details. So it has, you see it was created by a Navi agent. It has the details of the recs that were consolidated. If I go into the details, it took all of the line items, the quantities and prices from those recs that it consolidated. It put them all together here into the items and services. And then there were 2 of the recs, the requisitions that had a supplier, so pulled those in here as well. So you can imagine there's a lot of different adjustments you can make to this, but again, just wanted to highlight a potentially valuable use case in the procurement and sourcing arena. So the second agent and last that I wanted to demo for you very briefly is another one I created yesterday, this discount payment optimizer, right? Again, another autonomous agent set up similarly. Um, the difference is, so what this does is it goes and it looks at all of the in-flight invoices that have early payment terms, but of course not all, depending on your company's particular, cost of capital or hurdle rate it specifies, you may or may not want to take it. So this is an example of one that actually we set up a call out to a tool that calls T-bill rates, right? And it calls a 52-week T-bill rate and adds a spread to it, and that becomes the hurdle rate. So then if I go, let me just quickly show you what would go to the AP manager for this one. So let's go to the trace. So this is the discount payment optimizer. So you'll see here, this is actually, the hurdle rate is 6.9%. Again, so this is dynamic. I think it's 3.9% is the current rate that it pulled. It adds 3% to that. So 6.9 is the discount rate compared to the discounted APR for that given invoice. And so I'll actually give you a readout of what you shouldn't take and what you should actually take. All right. So that was a quick demo of 2 use cases. Hopefully that gives you an idea of how the Agent Studio work, how the Navi agents work, what's possible. So given that, would love to get some feedback from you all in terms of what, if in your organizations, what you see as the highest value agent use cases and where you might start, or which one you might deploy next if you already have some. Interesting. Okay, nothing, not as much in sourcing, invoice to pay. Okay.
I expected to see a
But it
lot
makes,
more. I expected to see a lot more on the plan and analyze, but interesting results. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it probably reflects the composition, right, of the audience, certainly to some extent. But yeah, I think the takeaway is that depending on where you sit and what your role is and what part of the process you have responsibility for, you know, broadly looks like folks see opportunities out there. Well, great. Thank you for that input. So let's keep, in the interest of time, keep moving along. Um, so so everything we talked about thus far, what I just showed you, those are single agents that, address a fairly narrow use case. So, a well-designed agent essentially is going to do one job well. We're going to read a document, answer a question, etc. Then kind of the next level of maturity, if you will, or capability from again from an overall Coupa AI standpoint is the intake and orchestration capabilities, which what that does is it chains many agents or multiple agents together into a flow um, in order to improve user experience, automation capability, provide end-to-end visibility across a wider scope of processes. So this is just a quick real example. We won't, in the interest of time, demo this, but it's a common one that comes up. So new vendor software request, right? So this is a good use case where several, it's also a category, a purchase that almost every type of company makes. So where you have several parties are typically involved, legal, procurement, risk, IT, and there's a lot of coordination and that is required and visibility really matters as well. So just in this quick example, imagine what Tonki can do is has an intake agent that first and foremost only asks the questions, right, that fit the request and then captures the data one time, defaulting and pulling the information from context where it can, as opposed to asking somebody to enter it. Then you have a risk scoring agent to evaluate and assign a risk score. And in this case, assume it's not always just going to be fully automated with agents. In this case, you're going to have a human in the loop, right? Where human judgment is needed for, in this case, legal or security or privacy reviewers to approve or reject it. Um, and then once approvals are clear, you have a contract and requisition agent that can draft an agreement and create a PO ready requisition. And then the last step would be, a notification step back to the requester to let them know and the owner that the request is complete. And throughout all of that process, the requester and everybody who's involved in the process can see the live status, who currently owns the next step, and are there any blockers? And so it avoids, status chasing emails. And also this shows the steps being run in sequence, but the thing about orchestration too is it provides the ability to run certain steps in parallel, as appropriate. Um, and to really provide the more flexibility in designing and defining the details of your workflows. So up to this point, so we've talked about kind of individual agents, orchestration, but all within kind of the Coupa context. As I mentioned before, when I went through that architecture diagram, Coupa is also creating the ability to connect Coupa to other enterprise, AI tech stacks where appropriate. So this is just meant to kind of give you an idea, some of the, of when you might want to consider um, building outside of Coupa, and then and connecting back to Coupa. So you see, we've identified, again, this is not exhaustive, just to give you an idea, but typically there are, four criteria buckets that come into play as we talk with clients about this. And you're always going to want to make the decision on a case by case basis. So the first is there's strategic and organizational reasons rather. Um, so some clients have the company has made it an enterprise mandate, put forth an enterprise mandate to use a particular AI tool or there is an AI center of excellence at the enterprise level that already owns delivery on a mature AI stack. But there's functional scope reasons. So, the need certainly can go beyond procurement um, in AP. So maybe there's procurement data that's needed, but it's also data needed from the agent. Maybe it's an agent that pulls data from order to cash process, record report, kind of other systems and data elements. Um, and in some cases, there are limitations as to what Agent Studio and Tonkean can do. Um, and then there's data integration and risk reasons. So in some cases, tasks just have to be run in systems that, for whatever reason, Coupa and Tonkean, can't integrate with, can't connect to, or where there's central observability needed across, all AI activities at the enterprise level. Um, and you see there's commercial and DevOps rationale. So, happy to talk to you, any of you about, specific use cases of whether or not they can be satisfied in Coupa or not. I think the main takeaway now is there's situations where Coupa, Coupa on its own would not suffice, and this kind of gives you an idea of what those cases look like.
Yeah, Mason, I'll jump in with a real life
Mhm.
example of an
Yeah.
agent outside Coupa. We did a webinar on this a few weeks ago. It's called Auto Accrual AI. And what it does is it pulls all the data from Coupa from a purchase order invoice receipt perspective, makes predictions on what accruals should be posted at the end of the month, and then sends Teams messages, Slacks messages, or emails to users to verify that, and then post the accrual. So that's an example of something that a Coupa agent couldn't do on its own. So we built an agent outside of Coupa to do something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good example. Thanks, Bruce. So let's keep moving along here. Conscious, we only have 10 minutes or so. Want to get you out here on time. We want to spend most of the time on what we just covered, which is uh, what Coupa offers in the AI realm, and to give you an idea of what's possible. But we wanted to spend a little bit of time now addressing how you might think about, proceeding moving forward now that you hopefully have a better understanding of what Coupa's AI capabilities are and what Compose does. So I just want to hit on a few points there. So think about it, when we work with clients to put together a roadmap around AI, the first thing we think of in terms of a kind of a high level three-step process, right? So the first is to prioritize value levers, and review the source to pay value levers against your current operational performance and strategy, and then pick which ones you actually want to move. Then define a set of linked use cases, right, that you want to tie to them based on the prioritization, and define the agent orchestration use cases that are going to move those levers the most. And then the third is to sequence for value and for optionality, right? You want to balance speed to value against the implementation effort as you think about how to order your roadmap, and you want to build in enough flexibility in to allow your AI stack to evolve as technology and your organizational needs. Um, and in particular, that's where leveraging the MCP server and thinking about that I mentioned is a way to um, preserve some optionality to move beyond Coupa at some point as appropriate. So one question, just real quick on the first step, related to value. We get a lot of questions around, AI metrics and how to tie them to value. So here's a quick example, or I would say an overview of some of the key leading AI metrics that matter, that you want to think about moving these early on when you're developing your roadmap, but then tie them back to tangible value. So think of those again as AI leading indicators on the top, AI adoption, that assesses whether the team's actually using AI day to day, autonomy looking at um, your procure to pay or about a source to pay, touchless rate, share of invoices clearing with no manual touch, orchestration measures, how many workflows, are route end to end with no triage, speed related measures, et cetera. But those are all leading indicators. So the key is to tie the roadmap to the hard value underneath. So this would be spend savings that map to the P&L, time and productivity gains, that you can use to your teams can use to redeploy to higher value work, and then working capital optimization as well. So let's look at some of drill down a bit on those hard value measures. Um, I won't go through all of them, but again, the idea here is that you ultimately come up with a roadmap that ties back to these specific measures here, right? So one's around realized savings, so everything from sourcing effectiveness, right, to secure to run more effective sourcing events over a larger percentage of your spend in an automated way, to driving buying channel compliance, supplier compliance, making sure they're submitting accurate invoices consistent with your contracted terms, through actual FTE and team efficiency you see there at the bottom, and then the working capital levers are broken down a bit more there on the right. So if you take those value levers, this is just an example mapping of what it would look like if you take those and then you start to think about what's an agent we can actually deploy against that lever and how it actually addresses it. Right, so you'll see just two quick examples. So sourcing optimization. I know that some of you at least use Coupa Sourcing Optimization, which is a very powerful platform, but sometimes the effort, right, that it takes to set up an event can limit how widely it's used, right, across your spend base. And maybe it's not applied in certain categories where it would make sense. So sourcing optimization event agent actually helps automate looking at building CSO events for you, which addresses that sourcing effectiveness lever. And then on the working capital side, one example, payment terms extension, that's an agent that assesses AP terms against vendor and peer benchmarks to identify opportunities for extending them. So leave this to you, that you can read through the details afterwards, and we have even a more comprehensive list of agents than this, is just to give you an idea of one across each of the levers. So just the last quick point on then, at this point we've focused on, all right, what are the AI leading indicators we want to move, tying those to hard benefit levers, then identifying kind of a portfolio of AI use cases that can drive them. Then you have to think about how to sequence them. This is just going to give you a flavor of how we think about and how you might want to think about putting together a roadmap, especially if you're new to Coupa AI, Coupa Compose. The phase one is, think of that as your quick win, Navi agents, and building, if you go the Tonkian route, focusing on the base intake. So everything here would be inside the Coupa UI, requires the lowest lift, fastest path to value. Phase two, and you see some example agents that you might include in there. Phase two would be, typically makes sense then to start looking at more advanced studio agents and orchestration flows where there might be more the agents in studio that you build may have be tied to other agents. There's a more advanced, corpus of, knowledge documents that needs to be built to ground them and provide them with the right context. There's external APIs that need to be set up, et cetera. And then third is a longer term phase, again, to think about, if appropriate, is extending into those external agents and, thinking of embedding Coupa as part of a wider enterprise-wide AI layer, orchestration layer, where it's leveraging the MCP tools and some of those other integration options that are going to be coming. So now, in the last few minutes here, if we could just maybe go to our last poll, given what we just talked about. Love to hear from you all what the biggest challenges in defining a roadmap and getting buy-in to move forward. Pretty even distribution. But yeah, I'm not surprised that governance and risk concerns like that comes up a lot, understandably. I know alluded to that a little bit, but for anybody interested, happy to go into more detail about how to address, how to build in the right controls and governance and address those concerns. Wonderful. Well, I know we're right at time, and I know Bruce and I covered a fair amount in a relatively short period of time. But again, hopefully this is giving you a better understanding of the latest and greatest Coupa AI features and functionalities and how to think about deploying it at your organization. If you please reach out to any of us, or to me in particular, you see my email address there if you'd like to have a follow-up discussion. And you'll see here, this is a agenda for what we call it a Coupa AI activation workshop. We found this to be pretty effective. We've been doing a lot of these lately with clients where we spend a day going through a structured way to quickly identify a few specific agents that we can kind of co-build with you and your team that in theory would be ready to deploy right away after that first day, should you decide to do so, and to help build out a roadmap along the lines of what I've covered, tied to some those value levers and some estimates of business impact. So if you'd like to discuss that or anything else we talked about, please reach out to me. With that, I think we're right at time. We'll wrap it up there.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining, and we're going to get the Q&A published out. I think we answered almost every question as they were coming in, so it was great having a team of 3 doing that. But thank you for joining, and we'll get the follow-up materials out to everybody.